it's Sir Rob. Today I am going to discuss Chapter 1 of the course IS Audit. Our topic is the nature of Information Systems Audit and Controls. We begin by defining what an IS audit is. To make things clear, Information Systems Audit and Information Technology Audit are interchangeable. They refer to the same discipline and you cannot separate one from the other. But for classroom purposes, we will be using IS Audit throughout the course. As always, in the practice of accountancy, we should remember to be professional, perform effectively and efficiently, follow standards, and document our work adequately and properly.
What is IS Audit? The concept of IS Audit was formed in the mid-1960s when computers are finally finding their way into the business world, with programs, with business applications. Since that time, IS Audit has gone through numerous changes, largely due to advances in technology and the incorporation of technology into business. Currently, there are many IT-dependent companies that rely on information technology in order to operate their businesses. For example, telecommunication or banking companies. For the other types of businesses, IT plays a big part of companies' endeavors, including 1. Application of workflow instead of using the paper request form. 2. Using the application control instead of manual control, which is more reliable. And 3. Implementing that ERP application to facilitate the organization by using only one central application. According to these, the importance of IS Audit is constantly increasing. One of the most important roles of the IS Audit, dispensed primarily by the internal auditor, function of an entity is the audit over the critical systems in order to support the financial audit by the external auditor or the support list specific regulations. For example, the Sarbanes-Oxley Law Act of 2002. The law specifically in Section 404, Assessment of Internal Control, requires management to produce an internal control report that contains an assessment as of the end of the most recent fiscal year of the company of the effectiveness of their control structure, which includes the IT components and procedures of the issuer for financial reporting. To do this, managers are generally adopting an internal control framework such as that described in COSO, or the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Trendweight Commission, which emphasizes a 5-frame component that includes information technology and communication, a component focused on information systems. Within the scope of assurance services, IS Audit is usually a part of a more general financial audit that verifies an organization's accounting records and financial statements. Information systems are designed so that every financial transaction can be traced. In other words, an audit trail must exist that can establish where each transaction originated and how it was processed. Aside from financial audits, operational audits are used to evaluate the effectiveness and efficiency of information system operations, and technological audits verify that information technologies are appropriately chosen, configured, and implemented. While financial and technological audits may be rendered by the auditor as components of a single financial statement audit engagement, the latter may be separately offered for entities that need a Type 2 independent opinion on the description, design, and operating effectiveness of their information system controls, such as service organizations set to provide third-party services. Having considered all the foregoing discussions, we can now proffer a definition of IS Audit. IS Audit is an internal or independent external examination of the management's internal controls within an information technology or IT infrastructure in business applications. The evaluation of evidence obtained determines if the information systems are 1. Safeguarding assets. IT assets generally include hardware, for example servers and switches. Software, for example mission-critical applications and support systems. And confidential information. Assets should be protected from illicit access, use, disclosure, alteration, destruction, and/or theft, resulting in loss to the organization. 2. Maintaining data integrity. This includes the maintenance of and the assurance of data accuracy and consistency over its entire life cycle. Data integrity is a critical aspect to the design, implementation, and usage of any system that stores, processes, or retrieves data. The term is broad in scope and may have wide different meanings, depending on the specific context, even under the same general umbrella of computing. Any unintended changes to data as the result of a storage, retrieval, or processing operation, including malicious intent, unexpected hardware failure, and human error, is failure of data integrity. 3. Using resources efficiently. IT resources management is acquiring, allocating, and managing their resources, such as individual and their skills, finances, technology, hardwares, software, and netware required for a project. IT resource management ensures that internal as well as external resources, such as the case when IT outsourcing is employed by the entity, are used effectively on time and on budget. Number 4. Operating effectively to achieve the organization's goals or objectives. Any specific information system aims to support operations, management, and decision-making. Therefore, the quality of operations of an information system may hamper operations, causing delays and backlogs, and stifle management's effort at improving operations. Ineffective operations will also affect the timeliness of decision-making and the quality of the decisions. And we know that decisions made on delayed or inaccurate data may do harm than good to the enterprise. IS audits are also known as Automated Data Processing Audits or ADP audits and Computer audits. They were formerly called Electronic Data Processing Audits or EDP audits. The threefold objective of IS audit in relation to a risk-based audit are as follows. 1. Evaluate the information system and business processes in place that secure company data. Information systems and business processes go hand in hand. Obtaining an understanding of the entity's business processes, which include how transactions are originated, assists the auditor in obtaining an understanding of the entity's information system in a manner that is appropriate to the entity's circumstances. An entity's business processes include the activities designed to develop, purchase, produce, sell, and distribute an entity's products and services. Business processes also include activities that ensure compliance with laws and regulations, and are also activities that record information, including accounting and financial reporting information. Business processes result in the transactions that are recorded, processed and reported by the information system. It is important to document such process to see where the manual controls interact with computer-based controls, and thus help the auditor to determine where gaps and lapses exist throughout the processing. 2. Determine risks to company's information assets. This is accomplished by the entity under IS Audit. As we have learned in assurance and auditing subjects, management has the responsibility to assess the risks and design and implement controls to address the risks. During IS Audit, the auditor too perform risk assessment in conjunction with materiality setting in audit planning. The auditor's risk assessment and corresponding audit report will uncover areas the entity might need to improve its control to mitigate or eliminate the risks to information assets. 3. Help identify methods to minimize those risks. IS auditors may identify control weaknesses that exist in the enterprise. The extent to which conclusions and recommendations about the weaknesses are communicated to the management and those charged with governance. Some third parties may not be willing or able to implement recommendations. In these situations, the IS auditor should recommend compensating controls that the enterprise could implement to address control weaknesses and the third-party organization. In some cases, the enterprise may have to refer back to contract language to determine the appropriate course of action with management.
And if significant issues continue to exist as third parties. An IS audit is different from a financial settlement orders. While financial orders serve purpose is to evaluate whether the financial statements present fairly in all material respects, and these financial position, results of operations, and cash flows in conformity to standard accounting practices. The purposes of an IS audit is to evaluate the system in certain control design and effectiveness. It includes, but is not limited to, efficiency and security protocols, development processes, all kinds of governance are oversight. Therefore, it is also appropriate to consider the peculiar characteristics and activities that are of significance to IS role. First of these stack matrix trails, lack of visible audit trail. An audit trail, also called audit logs, is a security-relevant chronological record, set of records, and/or destination and source of records that provide documentaries or electronic evidence of the same sequence of actions have affected on time a specific operation, procedure, event, or device. It is also defined as a sequence of recurrence of computer events that involve any activity around the operating system, applications, or user access. One computer's Mercera iTrust forms serves a different purpose. While audit trails are used in financial software, they are also make tools for analyzing, reporting on material, and operational processes. An audit trail is important because it is used to verify and validate software and business transactions by tracking selected user activities or accounting financial statements amount net to the transactions from one source and data objects used to create or modify a record. Trailers businesses to scan and authorize use of orange runs. The use of tolerance has led to the disappearance of many elements of the visual or trails necessary for track of financial operations, starting from the original documents until the account balances and vice versa. This has resulted to manipulation of information using computers. The prevalence of this type of crime was caused mostly by inadequate internal controls and the inadequate design of the information system. Data may be input to a system without leaving an audit trail of transactions. For example, a customer may order goods by accessing the client's system directly. In that case, no hard accounting for just is the internal accounting preparation of the invoice and shipping documents, debit to account receivable and related credit to sales, debit to cost of goods sold and the related credit to inventory, and reduction in the inventory records for the quantities sold can be accomplished without generating hard copy documentation. The auditor must be able to confirm that the system is properly recording all these activities. For the IS Auditor, if the Information System Audit Trail hasn't been designed properly or hasn't been activated during implementation, the auditor will be unable to trace individual transactions from source to completion or from completion back to source, and would therefore not be able to perform conventional audit tests. Fortunately, most information systems today have incorporated audit trails and the functionality to activate or deactivate it or turn on or off some of its features into their IS products. For example, the audit trail function in the accounting software QuickBooks to allow the enterprise to retain a history of how many changes have been done to the QuickBooks data file, to track user login details and activities, and to find deleted or lost transactions. The following as an example of how an audit trail might be designed by the enterprise and used by the auditor in auditing accounts receivable balance. 1. Starting with the financial statements, the auditor compares the accounts receivable balance in the balance sheet with the master file accounts receivable control account. 2. He then reconciles the account receivable control figure with the account receivable subsidiary account totals, which is another master file which may be owned by a different user who has no access to the accounts receivable control master file. 3. She selects and sample up and date and trace made to accounts in the accounts receivable serial and trace these transactions in the sales journal, an archive file of sales transactions which contain the unique serial numbers that identify each individual transaction. And from these journal entries, he identifies specific hard copy or printed source documents that can be pulled from their files and verified. If necessary, the auditor can confirm the accuracy and propriety of these source documents by contacting the customers in question. The same procedure may be performed when tracing user login details and activities or finding deleted or lost transactions. consistency of performance. Consistency of performance. Here's a characteristic of IS, which is described as a requirement that any given database transaction must query affecting in the only allowed ways. Any data written to a database must be valid according to all defined rules, including constraints, errors, triggers, and any combination thereof. The business rules and constraints that are applied into the system parameters ensures that all similar transactions will be uniformly processed. This means that if the rules and constraints have not been changed, the auditor gets a guarantee that results in one transaction will be consistent to all similar transactions. However, this does not guarantee correctness of the transaction. If the business rules and constraints have not been properly defined in the system, the error will be carried by all the transactions. Thus, the error in one transaction that the auditor uncovers can be projected to all similar transactions in a particular database. If not detected, the error can easily escalate materiality levels during planning. Fortunately, the consistency in processing also allows consistency and therefore simplicity in correcting error. This means that all the erroneous transactions can be corrected in one go with an update to the business rules and constraints, or hot back-end correction of the data. Phase of access to data and programs. This characteristic of IS audit is a double-edged sword. It has equally weighty benefits and risks. First, let's talk about the benefits. Employees are users of an information system. They don't just want instant access to the exact information they need. They expect that business-critical information will be quickly and easily accessible. However, in many cases, the consumer-grade technology experience employees are expecting at work is impeded by critical information being hard to access and nearly impossible to process. This is due in part to factors such as information silos, restricted permissions, and lack of centralized and updated content. Yet, providing your employees with the ability to access and grow cross data is well worth the effort. In fact, it can create competitive advantage for your business in these 4 ways. 1. Improve customer service. Giving employees ready access to relevant information can enable better customer service. When customers have an issue with your product or service, they don't contact you hoping to be put on music hold for a while or to wait a couple of days for a response to their email. They want answers and trust. You need to empower your team to provide them. Informed, engaged employees with immediate access to critical data can get to work helping customers resolve their issues. Those working in organizations where information is siloed tend to benefit or advantages build trust. In 2017, the annual Eggleman-Trust-Barometer report found that regular rank-and-file company employees have considerable credibility. That's one of many reasons it's important that employees feel integrated within the organization. Whether it's understanding the company's mission or knowing how to access the data they need for superior customer service. Not only are employees who feel connected more engaged when they interact with customers and partners, they become viable brand ambassadors when the workday or night is over. Whether they're vacationing on the other side of the world or taking classes across town, your employees are bound to be asked the question that seems to translate effortlessly across culture. What do you do? Simply put, employees who feel set up for success by leadership are more likely to say nice things. 3. Drive profitability. Employees who are connected to centralized sources of information make more informed decisions. If a customer spends time on the phone with one of your employees to resolve an issue, then has to start over from the very beginning with another employee to resolve the issue, your company loses twice. First, you sacrifice a favorable impression in the service category, and second, by having employees perform redundant tasks, you've also taken a hit on profitability. On the other hand, however, according to a study by Gallup, companies that score higher on employee engagement realize many benefits, including higher earnings per share. 4. Empower business leaders. Business leaders need quick and easy access to business data in order to identify trends, visualize bottlenecks, focus on the most pressing issues, and quickly obtain the insight they need to make informed business decisions. This instant access to critical information can mean the difference between a fully aligned, well-oiled organization and one that is overwhelmed by riddled by inefficient processes and lacking the necessary visibility to say competente. Now, let's look at the dark side of each of access, one that carries risks that the IS Auditor is interested in, namely digital security risks, 1. Confidentiality risks. 1. Digital security risks. Enhanced access and sharing typically requires opening information systems so that data can be accessed and shared. This may further expose parts of an organization to digital security threats such as hacking that can lead to incidents that disrupt the availability, integrity, or confidentiality of data and information systems on which economic and social activities rely. Consequently, organizations' assets, reputation, and even physical activities can be affected to a point where their competitiveness and ability to innovate are undermined. More importantly, where data is shared among suppliers and customers, these incidents may have a negative impact along the entire supply chain. If critical information systems are concerned, they could undermine the functioning of essential services. The risk of digital security incidents is growing with the intensity of data use. The actual proportion of the impact varies significantly depending on the motivation and form of the incident. Organized giants may target vulnerable information that they can sell or illegally market. And as innovation becomes more digital, industrial digital espionage is also likely to further rise. In some cases, the motive may be political, or the attacks may be designed to damage an organization or an economy. Number 2, disadvantage is increasing impact of personal data breaches. Where data can be accessed and shared, personal data breaches are more likely to occur. They will not only cause harm because of the privacy violation of the individuals whose personal data have been breached. They can also cause significant economic losses to the business affected, including loss of competitiveness and reputation. In addition, further consumer detriment may result from a data breach, as harm caused by identity theft. Personal data breaches are less frequently experienced compared to other types of digital security incidents, such as malware, phishing, and social engineering, or denial of service, for what is popularly known as DDoS. However, evidence from Privacy Rights Clearinghouse suggests that although the total number of identified incidents may be relatively small compared to other security impact types, their impact is increasing drastically as large-scale data breaches. That is, data breaches involving more than 10 million records become more frequent. This is confirmed by available evidence suggesting that data breaches have increased with a collection, processing, and sharing of large volumes of personal data. In 2005, for example, ChoicePoint of consumer data aggregation company was the target of one of the first high-profile data breaches involving over $120 in personal records. The company paid more than $26 million in fees and fines. Data breaches have since become almost quantified. In October 2018, Facebook was fined £5,000, the maximum fine possible by the Information Commissioner's Office of the United Kingdom, who are unfairly processing personal data and failing to take appropriate technical and organizational law measures against unauthorized or unlawful processing of personal data. This incident involved more than 87 million personal records that were used by Cambridge Analytica. Data breaches are not limited to the private sector, though, as evidenced by the theft in 2015 of over 21 billion records stored by the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, including 5.6 million fingerprints, and by the Japanese pension service breach that affected 1.25 million people in 2015. The violation of privacy, intellectual property rights, and other interests. The risks of enhanced access and sharing go beyond digital security and personal data breaches. They include most notably risks of violating contractual and socially agreed terms of data reuse, and thus risks of reasonable expectations of users. This is true in respect to individuals, which are the data subjects, their consent and their privacy expectations, but also in respect to organizations and their contractual agreements with third parties and the protection of their commercial interests. In the case of organizations, these risks can negatively affect incentives to invest and innovate. This is true even in cases where these risks may be the unintended consequences of business decisions. For small and medium-sized enterprises, identifying which data to share and defining the scope and conditions for access and reuse is perceived as a major challenge. Inappropriate sharing of data can lead to significant costs due to organization, including fines due to privacy violations and opportunity costs due to a lower ability to innovate. For example, it has been noted that sharing data too prematurely can undermine the ability to obtain an ITR, or intellectual property right, that had, for example, patents and trademark protection. Consolidation of duties without weakening control. Internal control objectives are the same under manual systems and computer systems. However, their evaluation is different. The auditor must be aware of the differences between the two systems. Certain differences may result in improved controls, while other differences may result in reduced controls. Some differences, for example, that the centralization of processing may be a mixed blessing. In a manual environment, the traditional controls of segregation of the general categories of duties and responsibilities for authorization, processing, recording, custody, record keeping, and reconciliation. In an ideal manual system, the different employees would perform each of these major functions. One of the most important issues related to a computer processing system is the potential control risk associated with the consolidation or concentration of functions. For example, in an advanced ERP implementation, the functions of authorization, processing, and recording and reconciliation may be vested in a single computer program. Thus, in IS Audit, the consolidation of functions will require auditing the automated processes using other non-traditional techniques. In general, implementation of computer-based systems requires then new policies and procedures to make sure that proper segregation of duties is maintained. The audit implication is to ensure that appropriate controls are in place, which may include segregating the following IC relevant functions. And the function of data control includes the policies and process for governing and managing data. These are internal controls related to data management and data governance. The function of data entry. The process of transcribing information into electronic media, such as a computer or other electronic device, is the function of data entry. It can either be performed manually or automatically by using a machine or computer. Most data entry tasks are time-consuming in nature. However, data entry is considered basic, necessary task for most organizations. The function of computer operations. This is a major function of IT that has the responsibility to monitor the operations of hardware and software and ensure that they are operating normally, to troubleshoot or escalate alarms and errors, to perform IT housekeeping tasks like data backup and restore, and to serve the computer output needs of the users. The function of data and programs custodian. This function includes the function of the database administrator, who manages and maintains the database management system, or DBMS, and the logical and physical components of the database. System-generated transactions based on business rules. System-generated transactions are automatically generated transactions created by a computer-based information system. For example, a credit card statement and invoice is system-generated every single month. So are certain internal reserve requirement transfers, some depreciation payments, allowances for losses, and others. They can be generated periodically with a specific schedule using business rules or policies that are integrated as parameters on the information system itself, and the programs perform these functions automatically, time after time. The business rules integrated into the system is, of course, management of approved through a blank test approval document, such as a sign-off initial system parameters at the start of implementation of an information system. Revisions to these rules are done in the system using a parameter update process, one that requires an approved request and another approval for the update of the system parameters. For example, in my previous corporate job, the parameter for one business rule was not immediately updated. It took several days before the update, and the company lost hundreds of millions of revenue because of the outdated parameter. In the context of IS Audit, system-generated transactions require auditors to verify the business rules or parameters that are set in the system and trace the updates of the documents, noting the effectivity of the update in the system and the effectiveness of the parameter, as stated in the parameter update request document. vulnerability of data, and programmed storage media. Digital files are great because they take up less space, can be retrieved and copied easily, and can be mined for content far more efficiently than paper records. But preservation is not yet a strong point. Not yet. Anyway, cloud-based preservation helps, but it doesn't completely solve things because you have to keep funding the storage and migration over very long time periods. Funding gaps and lapses in maintenance will happen, especially if you are thinking on the scale of centuries. If you are curious about which lasts longer, paper or electronic records, the answer is paper can last centuries, given that the proper types is used and the proper conditions for storage are met. Electronic records currently last about 10 to 20 years unless they are migrated to new formats or media. Thus, having data stored on electronic media are more vulnerable to damage than data on paper. Electronic records seem like they won't be less vulnerable than paper because you can copy them millions of times with very little loss of data. However, if you have ever tried to open a Word document you made on a PC in, let's say, in 2020, you will have some idea of the problems that can occur. The software that originally read the file format may not exist. The medium the file is stored on can get lost or destroyed. The data might have gotten corrupted, or you may not have the hardware used to read the data, and so on. Someone tried to save a bunch of whole documentation from the early 1990s that was saved on floppy disks and only succeeded in salvaging about 1/3 of it, for example. Digital archivists recommend scheduled backups and migration of files in new formats, saving files in multiple physical locations, and so on. But imagine a situation common to archives. Let's say someone cuts funding and no one does the maintenance for 20 years. A gap of a decade or two in doing backups and migrations could result in losing all the files saved up until that point. What office is theirs is a file. Computer systems tend to centralize programs and data. In case of fire, files and computers may be destroyed together. If it is not possible to reconstruct the information files from another source, the company could be in serious difficulties. From an audit standpoint, there may even be a denial of opinion because nothing can be verified without proper access to records. Internal controls must be in place to make sure that data can be recovered in case of an accident or disaster. The auditor would have to ensure that there are policies and procedures to back up and recover data, as well as adequate insurance coverage for business interruption and for replacement of hardware that is destroyed or stolen.
The auditor's responsibility related to IS controls. The overall objective and scope of an audit does not differ whether an entity operates in a manual environment or in a completely automated environment or an environment involving some combination of manual and automated elements. That is, manual and automated controls and other resources used in the entity system of internal control. IS and Skin lays down the responsibility of the auditor as regards internal controls in general. In the requirements section under the heading, its understanding of the entity and its environment, including the entity's internal control, and the subheading, the entity's internal control, paragraph 18. The IS requires the auditor to obtain an understanding of the information system, including the related business processes relevant to financial reporting, including Item B, the procedures within both information technology, and manual systems by which those transactions are initiated, recorded, processed, corrected as necessary, transferred to the general ledger, and reported in the financial statements. I can see the related accounting records supporting information and specific accounts in the financial statements that are used to initiate, record, process, and record transactions. This includes the correction and firm correction information and how information transferred to the general ledger. The records may be in either manual or electronic form. And IMD, how the information system captures events or conditions other than transactions that are significant to the financial statements. In Appendix 3, Paragraph 15 of ISA 315, therein described the object of the auditor. That is that nation system relevant to the preparation of the financial statements consists of activities and policies in accounting and supporting records designed and established to 1. Initiate, record, and process entity transactions, as well as to capture, process, and disclose information about events or conditions other than transactions, and to maintain accountability for the related assets, liabilities, and equity. Number 2. Resolve incorrect processing of transactions, for example, automated suspense files and procedures followed to clear suspense items out on a timely basis. Number 3. Process and account for system overrides or bypasses to controls. Number 4. I incorporate information from transaction processing in the general ledger. For example, transferring of accumulated transactions from a subsidiary ledger. Number 5. Capture and process information relevant to the preparation of the financial statements for events or conditions other than transactions, such as the depreciation and amortization of assets, and changes in the recoverability of assets and liabilities. Ensure information required to be disclosed by the applicable financial reporting framework is accumulated, recorded, processed, summarized, and appropriately reported in the financial statements.
Entity level controls. ISA 315 also describes the auditor's responsibility as regards understanding of the different levels of controls in an fighting environment. In evaluating the effectiveness of the design of controls and whether they have been implemented, the auditor's understanding of each of the components of the entity system of internal control provides a preliminary understanding of how the entity identifies business risks and how it responds to them. It may also influence the auditor's identification and assessment of risk of material misstatement in different ways. This assists the auditor in determining and performing further audit procedures, including any plans to test the operating effectiveness of controls. For example, the auditor's understanding of the entity's control environment, the entity's risk assessment processes, and the entity's process to monitor controls components are more likely to affect the identification and assessment of risks of material misstatement at the financial statement level. Another example, the auditor's understanding of the entity's information system and communication and the entity's control activities components are more likely to affect the identification and assessment of risk of material misstatement at the assertion level, with the first level of control is entity level control, which includes 1. The control environment, 2. The entity's risk assessment process, and 3. The entity's process to monitor the system of internal control. Why is the auditor required to understand the control environment, the entity's risk assessment process, and the entity's process to monitor it as a system of internal control?
The control environment provides an overall foundation for the operation of the other components of the system of internal control. The control environment does not directly prevent or detect incorrect misstatements. It may, however, influence effectiveness of control in the other components of the system of internal controls. Similarly, the entity's risk assessment process and its process for monitoring the system of internal control are designed to operate in a manner that also supports the entire system of internal control. Because these components are foundational to the entity's system of internal control, any deficiencies in their operation could have pervasive effects on the preparation of the financial statements. Therefore, the auditor's understanding and evaluation of these components affect the auditor's identification and assessment of risk of material misstatement of the financial statement level, and may also affect the identification and assessment of risks of material misstatement at the assertion level. Risks of material misstatement at the financial statement level affect the auditor's design of overall responses, including, as explained in IS 830, an influence on the nature, timing, and extent of the auditor's further audit procedures. In addition to understanding the control environment, why does the auditor evaluate the control environment? The auditor's evaluation of how the NCTs demonstrates a behavior consistent with the entity's commitment to integrity and ethical values, whether the control environment provides an appropriate foundation for the other components of the entity's system of internal control, and whether any identified control deficiencies undermine other components of the system of internal control. Assists the auditor in identifying potential issues in the other components of the system of internal control. This is because the control environment is foundational to the other components of the entity's system of internal control, as already mentioned. This evaluation may also assist the auditor in understanding risks faced by the entity, and therefore in identifying and assessing the risks of material misstatements. The auditor's evaluation of the control environment as it relates to the entities of ITs may include such matters as whether IT governance initiatives commensurate with the nature and complexity of the entity, and its business operations enabled by it, including the complexity or maturity of the entity's technology platform or architecture, and the extent to which the entity relies on its IT applications to support its financial report. Evaluation also may include such matters as the ID organizational structure and the resources allocated. For example, whether the entity has invested in an appropriate IT environment and necessary enhancements, or whether a sufficient number of appropriately skilled employees have been employed, including way entity uses commercial software with no or limited modifications. Why does the auditor evaluate whether the entity's risk assessment process is appropriate? The auditor's evaluation of the entity's risk assessment process may assist the auditor in understanding where the entity has identified risks that may occur and how the entity has responded to those potential risks. The auditor's evaluation of how the entity identifies its business risks and how it assesses and addresses those risks assists the auditor in understanding whether the risks faced by identity have been identified, assessed, and addressed as appropriate to the nature and complexity of the entity. The former having to do with theoretical risks that the entity may encounter, while the latter looks at actual risks that an entity has encountered. This evaluation may also assist the auditor with identifying and assessing financial statement level and assertion level risks of material misstatements, whether the entity's risk assessment process is appropriate to the entity's circumstances, considering the nature and complexity of volunteers, a matter of the author's professional judgment. For example, in some less complex entities, and particularly owner-managed
entities,
an appropriate risk assessment will be performed through the direct involvement of management or the owner-manager. For example, the manager or owner-manager may routinely devote time to monitoring the activities of competitors and under the developments in the marketplace to identify emerging business risks. The evidence of this risk assessment occurring in these key types of indications, often not formally documented, but it may be evident from the discussions the auditor has with management are in fact performing risk assessment procedures. Matters that may be relevant for the auditor to consider when understanding how the entity monitors its system of internal controls include: 1. The design of the monitoring activities, for example when it is periodic or ongoing monitoring. 2. The performance and frequency of the monitoring activities. 3. The evaluation of the results of the monitoring activities on a timely basis to determine whether the controls have been effective. And 4. How identified deficiencies have been addressed through appropriate remedial actions, including timely communication of such deficiencies to those responsible for taking remedial actions. The auditor may also consider how the entity's process to monitor the system of internal control addresses monitoring information processing controls that involve the use of IT. This may include, for example, 1. Controls to monitor complex IT environments that evaluate the continuing design effectiveness of information processing controls and modify them as appropriate for changes in conditions, or evaluate the operating effectiveness of information processing protocols. And this may also include controls that monitor the permissions applied in automated information processing controls that enforce the segregation of duties. And the considerations also may include controls that monitor how errors or control deficiencies related to the automation of financial reporting are identified and addressed. Why is the auditor required to understand the sources of information used for the entity's monitoring of the system of internal control? The auditor's understanding of the sources of information used by the entity in the monitoring the entity's system of internal control, including whether the information used is relevant and reliable, assists the auditor in evaluating whether the entity's process to monitor the entity's system of internal control is appropriate. If management assumes that information used for monitoring is relevant and reliable, without having a basis for that assumption, errors that may exist in the information could commercially lead management to draw incorrect conclusions from its monitoring actuals. General ID and application level controls. General ID controls are implemented to address risks arising from the use of IT. Accordingly, the auditor uses the understanding obtained about the identified IT applications and other aspects of the IT environment in the applicable risks arising from the use of IT in determining the general ID controls so identified. In some cases, an entity may use common IT processes across its environment or across certain ID applications, in which case common risks arising from the use of ID and general ID controls may be identified. The general ID controls include 1. Applications, 2. Database, 3. Operating system, and 4. Network. These will be discussed in details in General 2. In General IT Audit, greater number of general IT controls related to ID applications and databases are likely to be identified than for the other aspects of the ID and environment. This is because these aspects, the applications and databases, are the most closely concerned with the information processing and storage of information in the information system. Identifying general ID controls, the auditor may consider controls over actions of both end users and of the entity's IT personnel or operating service providers. Operating controls, as been named, safeguards include safeguards related to specific computer applications. For companies, this may consist of both automated and manual procedures. The software ensures that only authorized data gets processed by the application. Complication controls relate to the accuracy and completeness of the data that enters to technology systems. Application controls use several methods to ensure the data entered into the system is complete and accurate. For some systems, these controls may be more crucial than others. For example, application controls may exist and check whether the data entered into a system is reasonable and meets the required format. These are the three primary categorization of application controls: input, processing, and output controls. For example, a company may require employees to fill forms for every order. Imperative controls include checking whether the entered information meets the required format. For example, ensuring that employees can only put numbers for the units required. Similarly, include examining whether an order already exists with similar information to identify duplication. What are the key differences between general and application controls? There are several key differences between general ITs and application controls. For companies that employ information technology systems, these controls are critical. It is crucial to have both of these controls. However, it is still necessary to understand how they differ from each other. Some of the aspects in which general IT and application controls vary are as follows. 1. Definition. General controls apply to all computer systems or applications. They include a mixture of software, hardware, and manual procedures that shape an overall control environment. In contrast, application controls are specific controls that differ with each computerized application. For example, application controls for payroll systems differ from sales systems. 2. Types. As mentioned, general IT controls include software, hardware, and manual procedures. Therefore, these controls may consist of software controls, computer operations controls, data security controls, and physical controls, physical hardware controls, and much more. On the other hand, application controls are more specific. As mentioned above, there are only 3 types of application controls. These include input processing and output controls. Each of these may consist of more types, which all fall under application controls. 3. Scope. General controls, access, the operations of a company's whole information technology system. Therefore, it has a broader scope when it comes to its usage. On the other hand, application controls only apply to one application. Therefore, application controls have a narrower and defined scope. However, that does not suggest that these controls are futile. For example, as mentioned, general controls may include all controls related to information technology systems. Therefore, controls over test center and network operations are an example of general controls. These controls are specific to any information that uses networks. Antivirus or firewall is a typical general control that applies to all information technology systems. On the other hand, application controls are application-specific. Therefore, input controls are a prime example of application controls. With these controls, it is possible to validate any information that enters the systems. This way, companies can ensure only valid data gets into their systems. Control to make sure every employee gets paid once using the payroll software is application control. We will learn a lot more about this general IP and application controls when we come to Unit 3.
There it is, Chapter 1, the nature of IS Audit. In summary, IS Audit is a service included in the assurance services that may be offered by the audit firm or the auditor. It may be offered as part of an FS audit engagement or as a separate attestation service. The primary goal of IS Audit are safeguarding assets, maintaining data integrity, efficient use of IT resources, and ensuring that controls integrated in the organization at the entity level, general IT level, and application levels are operating effectively. Thank you for listening and stay safe always.